Welcome to the Podkey summary of History of the Song Dynasty. Today's story is the Song Dynasty, which managed to be dazzlingly inventive, deeply administratively sophisticated, and still politically and militarily vulnerable in ways that never really went away. It built a powerful civilian state, expanded exams, mapped its territory in remarkable detail, and eventually fielded a serious navy. But it also got squeezed by multiple rivals, torn up by factional politics, and undone by some catastrophic alliance choices. It's one of those periods where almost everything looks impressive right up until it doesn't. One of the biggest shifts under the Song was political. It replaced the military-heavy world of the five dynasties with a highly centralized state run by civilian scholar officials under the emperor. Founding Emperor Taizu took a very deliberate approach here. He persuaded major commanders to give up military power, retire comfortably, and stop being potential coup makers, using patronage and marriage alliances to make that arrangement stick. That move helped stabilize the dynasty, but it also tells you what kind of state the Song wanted to be. Less warlord politics, more bureaucracy. The imperial examinations grew enormously. In the early 11th century, maybe 30,000 candidates were sitting them each year. By the 13th century, it was closer to 400,000. That made official life more competitive and more prestigious, but the number of posts didn't expand at the same pace. So you had a huge educated elite with limited routes into office. Great for producing talent, not always great for political calm. And the Song state wanted information. It ordered province-by-province mapping so officials could manage taxes, famine relief, grain transport, policing, and military logistics with real local detail. Cartography here wasn't just about knowing where rivers and mountains were. It was a governing tool, a way of seeing the empire closely enough to administer it. The Song is often described as a paradox, and honestly that fits. This was a high point of scientific and technological innovation in China, and yet the dynasty spent much of its life under military pressure and was eventually conquered. The list of innovations is impressive. Gunpowder weapons, advanced mapping, hydraulic astronomical instruments using liquid mercury, sophisticated siege and naval engineering, and effective use of crossbows. At one point, early Song armies even defeated the Southern Han's war elephants with massed crossbow fire, which sounds dramatic because it absolutely was. What's striking is that technical sophistication didn't automatically solve the dynasty's strategic problems. Having clever engineers and having a secure geopolitical position are very different things. The Song also had a harder border situation than a simple north versus south story suggests. It faced the Khitan Liao, the Tangut Western Xia, the Jurchen Jin, Dai Viet in the south, and eventually the Mongols. So this wasn't one enemy and one front. It was a recurring multi-front problem, with diplomacy, war, and uneasy compromise happening at the same time. The Treaty of Shanyuan in 105 is a good example. The Song agreed to annual payments to the Liao of 100,000 ounces of silver and 200,000 bolts of silk. That sounds humiliating, and in symbolic terms, it certainly mattered. But economically, it didn't necessarily cripple the Song, because much of that silver came back through Liao purchases of Chinese goods. In fact, the really crushing expense was defense. Later on, military spending consumed about 3/4 of state tax revenue, while the tribute itself took only a tiny fraction by comparison. The Song's frontier playbook wasn't just fighting. It often mixed warfare with negotiated borders, tributary relations, titles for local leaders, and ways of incorporating border communities into imperial administration. That mattered in the Vietnamese case, especially, where negotiated demarcation lines ended up enduring in broad outline into the present. Along the Vietnamese frontier, the Song made a serious strategic mistake. Wang Anshi's broader push for stronger militias, tighter frontier control, and more aggressive extraction of local resources helped intensify tensions, and that contributed to the Li-Song War of 1075 to 1077. The fighting was severe, including the 42-day siege of Yongzhou, and in the end, neither side got a decisive victory. The war concluded with negotiated borders and a mutual draw, which is a reminder that stronger administration at the frontier could also provoke exactly the instability it was supposed to prevent. Wang Anshi is one of the central figures in this whole period because his new policies were ambitious and deeply divisive. He wanted the state to be more financially and militarily self-sufficient. That meant government loans to farmers, monopolies, land surveys, local militias, weapons bureaus, and replacing forced labor with taxation. Supporters saw that as competent state building in a dangerous world. Critics saw a government overreaching into local society and threatening the interests of the landholding class that supplied many scholar officials. And this argument did not stay polite. It hardened into a partisan struggle between reformers and conservatives that became cyclical and ugly. After Wang fell, Sima Guang reversed many reforms and pushed reformers aside. Later emperors brought the policies back. Opponents were exiled, marginalized, and in some cases persecuted, as in the case linked to Su Shi's poetry. By that point, policy disagreement had become factional repression, and that kind of politics drained the court's ability to respond coherently to fiscal strain and military danger. It's one thing for a state to face external pressure. It's another thing to spend years exhausting itself from the inside. The beginning of the end came in stages, and one of the biggest was the Song alliance with the Jurchens against the Liao. On paper, this got rid of a rival and changed the balance of power. In reality, it destroyed the old balance without giving the Song a secure replacement. Song forces performed poorly in the joint campaign, and the Jurchens learned something dangerous from that. The Song military was weaker than it looked. They soon turned on their former ally, and in 1127, the Jin captured Kaifeng. They carried off Emperor Quinzong and around 3,000 members of the court, including artisans, engineers, clockmakers, and entertainers. That detail really matters. Military defeat here didn't just mean territory lost or rulers captured. It also meant a direct transfer of technical expertise, including the specialists behind Susong's famous mechanical clock tower. And yet the dynasty did not end there. The southern Song regrouped in Hangzhou and reinvented itself around the south, the waterways, and maritime commerce. In 1132, it created China's first large permanent standing navy. That force grew from about 3,000 sailors in 11 squadrons to roughly 52,000 men in 20 squadrons. It used paddle-wheel ships, armored vessels, trebuchet-launched gunpowder bombs, and merchant ships converted for war. This was not an improvised flotilla. It was a serious naval system. That mattered in 1161, when the Southern Song Navy defeated a much larger Jin invasion force and helped secure about 4 decades of peace after the Treaty of Longsing. So even inside a story of vulnerability, there's this remarkable counter-story of adaptation. The dynasty lost the north and still built one of the most formidable naval powers of its time. The last collapse came after another alliance that backfired, this time with the Mongols against the Jin. Once the Jin fell in 1234, the Song attacked its former allies and opened the door to full-scale war with the Mongols, which was a very bad moment to discover you still had unresolved structural weaknesses. The Mongols eventually overcame the Song through a mix of defections, siege technology, naval blockades, and the capture of Xiangyang after a long siege from 1268 to 1273. The dynasty finally ended at the Battle of Yemen in 1279, when the Song fleet was defeated, and the last child emperor and Prime Minister Lu Shifu reportedly drowned. It's a stark ending for a dynasty that had been so commercially vibrant, technologically inventive, and administratively sophisticated. What makes the Song so compelling is the contradiction at its core. This was a state that could map its realm in detail, produce masses of educated officials, innovate in warfare and astronomy, and build a permanent navy. But it still couldn't fully overcome strategic exposure and internal fragmentation. Its decline wasn't one simple failure. It was the cumulative effect of expensive frontiers, damaging rivalries at court, and alliances that solved one problem while creating a worse one. That's what gives the period its texture. The Song wasn't weak in any simple sense. It was strong in ways that didn't always convert into security. So if you ever want a reminder that brilliant administration and sharp technology don't guarantee a calm century, the song has that covered. It's a fascinating dynasty, precisely because it got so much right and still couldn't escape the pressure building around it. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.